everyone, and welcome back to the Rumcast, the place where we talk all things rum-related with the people who love and shape it. My name is John Gulla, and co-hosting with me, as always, is Will Hookinga. And Will, on today's episode, we speak with one Mr. Ian Hoyles, the senior cask expert for Main Rum Company located in Liverpool, England, where we do a deep dive into how he, along with the team at Main Rum, run the world's largest single cask rum program. I think that's right. That's fair to say.
Oh, probably. I don't know that they claim that, but I mean, you know, in terms of independent, like outside of distilleries, there's certainly probably distilleries that have more single casks on hand than they do, but surely they would be the largest. I don't know. Don't fact check us.
I feel like, yeah. I'm just gonna say it, but it's my words, not anybody else's. Right?
I feel like if someone else was larger, we would have heard about them by now, right?
Yes, clearly. I'm just going to say it. Largest single cask rum program in the world. There you go. Let somebody tell me out there I'm wrong. Fully will admit it. But first, before we get to all that, Will, I think it's important for us to recognize what we just witnessed with regards to the Caribbean and Hurricane Beryl.
Yeah.
You know, if you've listened to us for a while, and Will, you know that besides being here in Miami and fairly close to the Caribbean islands, my day job has me focus a lot on hurricanes as well.
Right.
And unfortunately, this was a really tough one for a lot of reasons. We talked about it and had a special event at University of Miami where we have a lot of our hurricane researchers. They were telling us some facts about this hurricane that were just terrible to hear, and we all saw the media and the things from those affected. This was the first time in recorded history we had a Cat 4 hurricane like this in the month of June.
Wow.
It's the earliest ever Cat 5 recorded storm.
Really?
And that was in early July. Beat it by like 2 weeks. Yep. So It's the earliest ever Cat 5. And the accumulated cyclone energy from just Beryl, and that's like a measurement of how much total energy is put into tropical systems overall throughout the season, that Beryl has already surpassed by itself many of the full years of hurricane seasons that we've seen in the recent past.
Wow. So that's scary, right? Legitimately scary.
Yes, to see something like that happen this early in the hurricane season and how many people were affected by just this one storm, but to know we're still in July. You know, the peak season isn't usually till late August, September, and those months, and then it extends out through November. So it's just, you know, it unfortunately feels like a harbinger of what we're seeing with some of perhaps climate change, the ocean temperatures, and some of the other factors that are playing into this. And it's pretty rough to see already how many people have been impacted by this storm.
Yeah, and we know, I mean, obviously through the course of this podcast, we discuss many distilleries, many people, many producers who are in the Caribbean and areas that were impacted significantly by this hurricane. And so, you know, we just, anytime we can, we want to draw a little attention to this, put some resources out there for anyone who is willing and able to donate, help out in any way they can. Mm-hmm. We reached out to some of our friends of the show in the Caribbean just to kind of ask for, you know, recommendations of organizations that are doing good relief work down there. Because, you know, you can always like Google and find, and I'm sure you can find a lot of reputable organizations just through Googling it. But, you know, we wanted to talk to people who are close on the scene, you know, experienced going through stuff like this down there, and find an organization to point people to that is doing good work according to the people on the ground there. So we'll put a link in the show notes. You know, we're planning to put a little donation together for the Rumcast and just encourage anyone who's able and willing to contribute, you know, who cares about these places. I mean, as much as we love rum, I think one of the coolest things about the show is just getting to learn more about the people, the cultures, everything like that. Like that's part of what we love about it. And so when they're hurting, you know, we want to, you know, do whatever we can to help encourage other people who are rum fans, who appreciate these places, the people who make it, to reach out and do the same. So we'll put a link in the show notes there. And yeah, just our heart goes out, support goes out to anyone in any of those areas, whether they make rum or not, who is impacted.
That's right.
It's always terrible to see.
Yeah. And, you know, for those places you love, hey, we keep buying rum from there. But I think there's also another direct path, like you were saying, about finding ways to help them and keep supporting them, knowing that, you know, we hope, I'm knocking on wood right now, that this is the last storm that we see that affects any of these Caribbean nations this year. But being this early in the season, it's unlikely. and that there will be more to come. So we just want to follow through with whatever we can to do to be present in there for them to help.
Yeah. Well, with that said, I am really excited for people to hear this. You know, when we had the idea to talk to Ian, Main Rum has a connection. Obviously, it's part of Ian Ashier, who we've spoken about a lot on the show. We've interviewed Karsten Vleerboom from Ian Ashier, Niels Binshop from Ian Ashier. We also did like another interview with Karsten about Main Rum specifically a couple of years ago. And so I knew Ian was going to have other stuff to share about it, a different perspective. Because what is his title again, John? You mentioned it at the beginning of the interview. It's like one of the coolest titles. It's like Senior Cask Expert, I believe.
Yeah.
He's the first senior cask expert that I've ever met, someone with that title. And he probably has more knowledge of the age stocks that are available, and he's probably tried more of it than most people who are there right now, or I don't want to say that, but he's been tasting a lot of amazing aged rum, more so than maybe anyone else on the planet. Because again, what he has access to there, it's hard to find another collection of rum like that anywhere in the world. Certainly people at distilleries are tasting amazing rum all the time, but it's typically just from their distillery, right? Ian's sampling amazing stuff from all over the place. Some of it is casks that, aged at origin and then made their way up to Liverpool and aged there a little more. Some of it is rum that they bought unaged in bulk and then casked themselves and have, been shepherding up there. So he just has a lot of really interesting insights. I went back and, before we did this interview and listened to the last Main Rum episode we did with Karsten, just because I was like, I want to make sure there's not going to be too much overlap. And as soon as I listened to it, I was like, okay, I have so many questions still for Ian. There's not going to be any overlap here. And just to back up slightly for anyone who's like, Main Rum, like what's going on? What is this? Basically, at a high level, Main Rum, it's part of Ian Ashier, which is a bulk rum supplier. Anytime you go into a liquor store, almost any liquor store, I would probably say, and you see a third-party rum brand, so a rum brand that is not related to a distillery, odds are that at least one of those brands, they bought their rum from Ian Ashier. And Main Rum is really, Ashier kind of specializes in the blending of rums, stuff that's not aged quite as long typically. Main Rum is sort of like the boutique single cask arm of the company. So that's when you see these independent bottlers that are putting out, 20-year-old Port Morant rums that, aged in Europe for 15 years. Odds are they're getting it from Main Rum. So that's what they do. That's what they specialize in. And it's more than just single casks. As we talked to Ian about, they do some blending as well. So we got into all kinds of interesting stuff just about the science, the kind of the art and science of it. Also, just
and every piece of it, right? Because it's not just like, okay, we have rum, come buy it. Right. There's so much more behind the craft, I would say, of matching the rum to the right cask, aging it, and how you monitor that, how it then develops, and what kind of decisions are made during that development. I mean, there's a ton there. We could have probably talked for another 2 or 3 hours, honestly.
Yeah, and I like that we got in a few questions that are kind of in the vein of just like, what's some of the coolest shit you got there? Like that kind of stuff. So it was really fun. Ian is extremely knowledgeable, and we're thankful he was able to come and share some of that knowledge. So yeah, I'm excited for people to hear. Anything else to add before we go over to the interview?
As you were talking just now, and I was thinking, man, he's got to have one of the most well-informed palates on the planet for rum. I was wondering, like, does he need to insure his palate? We'll have to ask him. I didn't ask that, but now I'm wondering.
I don't know if you'll believe me, but I had the same thought when I was listening back over the interview.
Really?
Yeah, I was just this guy's palate must be pretty valuable. And just like all the knowledge. And obviously, it's not a one-man show. They have a whole team over there.
Right.
There's lots of knowledgeable people. I don't want to neglect, everyone else over there. He's not even the only Ian over there.
I know.
But I think we've teed it up enough. We'll just take a quick break and go over to the interview.
All right, so we're here with Ian Hoyles of Main Rum Company. And Ian, looking back at the history of Main Rum, I know the company was founded in 1984 by Ben Cross de Chavannes. Skier purchases Main Rum in 2001, and then you joined the team in 2015 as the operations manager. However, recently, we noted there's been a change in your title. So as of January of this year, your title is now Senior Cask Expert. So I wanted to start off the interview by asking a little bit about that. How much of a role shift has that been for you, if any? Or is it just the same job and it's a much cooler title?
It's a very cool title.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Well, in a bit of a shift in role, to be fair. And so it kind of does take me away a little bit from the operational side of things because it's very, very expansive. So it was somewhat sort of interfering with the other work that I do in terms of the rums and the profiling that we need to do for age and maturation processes, but then also all of the tastings and follow-ups that we need to do year on year when we get samples. So I still do a lot of the same responsibilities in terms of sales and things like that. So that's a main driver for me, but also it's very much sort of tied in with the stock, the inventory and how it matures and how we go forward with it.
Basically, if anyone has a question about anything cask related, you're going to be able to have some kind of answer. You've got a hand in all the plates that are spinning, it sounds like.
Well, I'm sort of the go-to. So for any kind of cask question, it would generally come my way, which could be anything. It could be something to do with logistics and transport of casks, or it could be down to the cask type or the types of woods that we use. So very many different things.
I think so. We've got a lot of questions. You know, normally I feel like we always have a fair amount of questions, but sometimes we get certain interviews where like John and I are looking at the questions doc beforehand, and we're like, "Holy shit, that's a lot of questions."
Yeah,
this is one of those. So we're gonna try to get through these, not to rush you or anything, but I kind of want to start with. There's so many super interesting aspects of your job, I feel like, and so there's a variety of ways to approach this, but one of the things I wanted to talk about first, before we get into all the kind of super nerdy rum related, like types of casks, how they affect the rum, the aging process, all that stuff, I wanted to talk a little bit about, it's so interesting to me because, you know, we talk to a lot of independent bottlers on the show, and one thing that John and I have noticed is, man, it seems like there are more and more of these companies every single year, and it's not like there are more and more Main Rums popping up every single year. Like, it's not that Main Rum is the only place in the world to get well-aged rum, but you're kind of a one-of-one type of company. There's, you know, Main Rums don't grow on trees, and so a lot of these new companies end up coming to you. And just something I've wondered about your job is you have all these new customers coming to you. They all want something unique. That's kind of what everyone's looking for, is they want something that, you know, is interesting and delicious, but also a different angle because they need to stand out from all these other independent bottlers. So with more and more kind of hitting the scene, how do you keep them all happy? Like, you know, I imagine a lot of times you'd have 5-10 people maybe wanting a particular cask, and I know you're not showing them all the same things, but like how do you juggle all those competing interests and keep everyone happy?
Well, I think everybody is very different in the way that they approach their own rum brand. Everybody has their own idealistic view of what they want to produce and put into a bottle. So, I mean, that is really, really good by itself because it means that everybody's got their own ideas and how they want to create their own USPs and innovations. So, one of the things that we do, we study in the different maturation of different cask types for different rums. And as you probably know yourself, there's a very large, wide variety of different types of rums. And so it's a bit of a difficult task to find what rums work with what cask. Could be
like infinite possibilities, right? It feels like, yeah.
But that's what's really wonderful about the whole thing, and really trying to understand what the different species of oak can contribute to the different varieties of rums that are being produced, as well as then your different species of oak with different pre-seasoned liquids, and different pre-seasoned liquids in different types of oaks will, you know, give us different results. And so it's really about understanding how those different seasoned liquids work, how the different cask types work, the different species of oaks, and really understanding the product that you've got in your inventory to then work out how those flavors can be balanced and matched together.
Yeah. So really, it sounds like it's not just a matter of having Well, you want to have an expansive inventory with lots of different options from lots of different producers, styles of rum, things like that. But then it's also, how can we take those and make it so we don't just have, 25 casks that are all the same from distillery X and then 20 casks that are all the same from distillery Y. You're trying to match certain profiles to different casks, and we're going to talk about all that. But that sounds like a fascinating kind of puzzle to it sounds like an interesting like consulting exercise, because you're also having to anticipate all this stuff like years in advance, right? Because the decisions you make now, it's not like you can just all of a sudden conjure up what people are asking for. In many ways, it has to do with decisions you made 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago.
Yep, and that's how it works. And so, given the inventories that we've got in our grasp at the moment, 20 or 30 years ago, some of these things were already done. And so this is what we use for our kind of learning and development as we go forward. Things that have been done before, proven and tested and verified, and that we know are going to produce really good products overall over a long space of time. Thinking into the future, that's kind of the way that we always have to think. And we have to plan for the next 10, 20, 30 years ahead, so that we have the inventories that are going to be available to people who want to buy. It is a balancing act. All we can do really, and what we have done, what we've always done as a team of now 2 companies, which is fantastic, is work together to be able to identify and understand new liquids that are being produced, where they're coming from, how they're produced, the way in which they're produced, understanding the flavor profiles and how we think that they will mature in the future. And given the inventories that we have, we can make pretty good predetermined guesses on how things are going to mature and in which cask types now as well, and how we think they will mature. So everything that we do is based on evidence that we've already got. And we've tried to broaden education and learning through using and trialing different cask types, different pre-seasoned liquids, so that we can understand how we can keep the very fine balance of original distillery character, as well as introducing new flavors. And so that's always going to be the fine balance that we find ourselves in, as well as maybe some of the older rums going too far in terms of the extractives that executed through maturation. So all of these very different aspects to what we do as a company and as a team are integral to how we sort of go forward now, how we identify things now, so that we can look to the future and make sure there's plenty of prosperity within our inventory.
That's a really good hidden point there, Ian, because, you think sometimes about the process of like, well, somebody coming to buy a barrel, and it's kind of like you just open up a warehouse and say, here you go, tell us what you want. And that's not what's really happening, right? Because your expertise and your team's ability to understand all of this has already provided better options than somebody who would just be like, well, we found a bunch of rum in barrels here, go ahead and tell us what you want to do with it, right? So there's a definite difference there. I guess we can start going down that road a little bit about how often do you have a buyer that starts by knowing what they want versus you having to then expose them to different options and narrowing it down after receiving their feedback? I guess, do you have any like standard rums or distilleries or barrels that you go to narrow things down?
Yeah, I think you can polarize people's options to a certain degree. But like I say, I think most people generally have an idea of what they're looking for. But we would always try to throw something else into the mix. What we're really trying to do is to broaden people's horizons in terms of the types of rums that are actually available, the flavor profiles within those rums, the rich sort of culture and traditional process that's used by these distilleries and countries that have stood the test of time. And so that's kind of a lot of the mandate and mantra is to obviously help people facilitate the rum brands and the rums that they want to put into bottles, but also to really try to educate and try to broaden everybody else's horizons. As soon as they walk through the door, this is the first thing that we think about, because there's a massive multitude of variety when it comes to rum, as you guys know. So, some people just haven't discovered it yet. And so one of my sort of ethos is everybody likes rum. Everybody does find the right rum yet. And that, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to find the right rums for the right people so that they can help to grow the category as a whole in the right way.
I know that I've also heard, along with those points and what we were talking about, there are rums that you have there that you all don't consider ready for purchase yet. So you're aging some rums in your warehouses that I assume you and others are checking up on and developing over time, but you don't, to your point about like giving them options, you don't give those options yet because they're not ready in your eyes. So does that mean that I want to know more about how that process works? What's the typical percentage of barrels being stored there that aren't even considered ready versus the ones that are?
Well, I don't think I could give you specific numbers. But this kind of alludes to, your question regarding new releases and things like that come out. We generally monitorize, every sort of year the different origins or the different styles of rums that we buy, and we'll do that through onogleptic evaluations every year to gauge the maturation process and how the extractives are actually working within the liquids, and then we would see whether that would be a viable product that could be released into the market. And, for some it's sooner, for some it's later. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for the extractives to come on and work and round off the liquid a bit more. And so, there's all those types of things that we look at in detail, initially by a few people, and then it's out to the wider team and for everybody else to discuss. And then it's not a discussion that's held by one person or decided by one person. It's something we would review and say, look, we think this is good enough to go. And then it would, be approved to be released into the marketplace. So, and this could be anything that's from, 2 or 3 years old, up to 8 years old. And when you've got a decent level of maturation, usually helps to round off the liquids and concentrate the flavors. So, we used to not sell rum at Main Rum Company until it was 8 years old, but that has that's long gone. That kind of practice now, and so we're a lot more fluid in how we operate with releasing new rums. But it does help us to release new things sort of every year, say, because things are at different levels of maturation, things are at different levels of extracted, homogenization. So it all kind of comes together quite well, and it means that we're able to sort of release things very slowly, but in a very controlled manner as well, so that we can have something that is premium.
Do you remember why 8 was the cutoff?
Well, 8 was the cutoff because we used to, Skia used to do the blends, which were 0 to 8 years old, and then Main Rum Company would do 8 years to 40 years, say, in single casks. But I think that tells you a little bit about the market and how that's developed a little bit over time. And so, people do like to have younger rums that are cask aged. Some of them would have been part matured in the tropics. Some of them would have been part matured in the UK or wider Europe. And so these offer different things to different people.
It sounds like this isn't really like an executive decision process where it's, you kind of walking through the warehouse and proclaiming like, yes, this barrel is now ready. You said move
it to that side of the warehouse. Sorry, go ahead.
It sounds like there's multiple people involved. Sometimes you might have conversations. Do you ever run into a cask where one person feels strongly, oh, this is ready for sale, and someone else thinks, oh no, like I don't see it. This really needs more time. Or it could be the opposite, where one person thinks like this needs to go now, or it's getting too old versus too young. And like, how do you do you have processes in place? Do you do like panels and voting? Like, how do you
workflow?
Yeah, how do you make the decision at the end of the day if people have different opinions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just samples, evaluation, discussion. That's, put it very, very simply, that's the way that it would be done. And everybody sort of has the sort of idea about what they think is right and what they think is wrong, what should go and what should stay. But yeah, it needs to be identified first. And so when we go through the individual casks that we do per year, or the individual rotations or types of rums, then it would be picked up at that point. And then we would put it out to the wider team to say, look, we need to discuss this rum for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then we discuss it together and we formulate how we go forward with it.
Yeah. How often is that happening? You mentioned like yearly a little bit there, but I imagine there's more going on with that than just once a year. It's not like picking a new pope, right, where you all lock yourselves in a room and then have to, come to a decision.
No, I mean, it's worked on throughout the year. So you can imagine, I don't know, maybe this year is like 1,000 samples. So it gets broken down into sort of, like daily tastings, if you like. And then I'll do the tastings, write particular tasting notes for those runs. And then if there is anything that needs to be discussed or identified that needs to go further in terms of the wider team, then we all get around the table, we all get a glass, and then we all start drinking and sort of discussing and evaluating the runs, and then formulate a plan on how we go forward with that.
Sounds like a terrible, horrible job to have. Oh my goodness.
It is pretty arduous. To be honest, you have to be quite careful because your palate can be really blown very easily.
Yeah.
And so, that's why we have to do it as like a daily type thing. And we're getting through maybe 5-10 samples a day throughout whatever other work that you're doing as well. It takes a bit of time to write up notes as well. I'm a little bit too detailed in notes, I think, sometimes. But I think it's all worth it because it's all stuff that we look back on, next year. So when we start reviewing the samples again after another 12-month period, then we look back at the previous notes and we can see, what notes we detected previously, what comments we've got. And, that kind of gives us a bit more of a detailed picture of how the rums are actually maturing and how the extractives are working. So, yeah, that's how we go.
How do you write tasting notes, by the way? Because it sounds like you have more than one person kind of putting their own notes out there, but everyone kind of has their own internal tasting. Like, I feel like there's two kinds of tasting notes when you're trying to describe a rum to people. There's your own internal vocabulary of like taste that you describe to yourself that has meaning to you, but probably doesn't make sense to someone else maybe. And then you like translate it into notes that might make more sense beyond just inside your head. Do you have like a giant word bank of like shared terminology that you guys use, or are you each just kind of saying what's on your mind and putting it out there?
It's like a little checkbox sheet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Like, caramel check.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that, but I don't think you really. For me, I wouldn't say that would be a good way to do things. I think it's more people need to have the freedom to express what they feel and they're tasting. And so I find that works a lot better. And, it's funny that you mentioned vocabulary. It's very interesting, the language that you need to use in terms of tastings and things like that. But as a sort of more general idea, the language within the rum industry as well is something that, needs to be worked on a lot as well. So, but yeah, the vocabulary is interesting at times, I would say, but that's kind of what makes it fun. And you can have a lot of fun with these types of things as well. Somebody might say, "Oh, this tastes like burnt electrical cables," and you think, "When did you taste burnt electrical cables?" But what you're trying to understand is that it's what somebody has smelled, but that's kind of what they're tasting on the. And so, and this is another funny thing about tastings as well. Something that you necessarily get on the nose isn't something that you're necessarily going to taste. And so, there's that kind of, idea planted sometimes. And we try not to talk too much as well. So everybody has their own ideas of what they're thinking. We do try to verbalize it.
Right, because you're going to influence each other.
Of course, and it happens all the time. Right. It happens with clients, and it's trying not to put words in people.
Everybody shut up.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit, it's the death silence of, people writing down.
Right. Because usually drinking together is a conversational kind of jovial environment. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's funny picturing a bunch of people just very seriously sipping in silence together. There was
like
something,
voting.
Yeah,
I can imagine
exactly.
It's like voting.
Yeah, it's like voting. No phones. Something you said back there stood out to me, and I wanted to follow up on it. You said sort of like the language in rum needs to be worked on a little bit. What are some examples of that? Can you dig into that a little deeper? What you meant by that?
I think just terminologies like dark rum, gold rum.
Oh yeah, of course.
All these things, and the way in which you describe the rums the terminologies used for, distillations and things like that. And just generally the way people talk about it. And it's something that I always think about when I talk about maturation processes and maturation cycles of rums. And so I just think it's quite important if we're trying to uplift the image of rum, so to speak. For many years, it's just had a bit of a bad name. It's unregulated spirit and, all these types of things. And I think it's quite damaging, I think, in some ways, because there's so much culture and sort of traditional processes that go into place. And there's a lot of love that's put into, these distillation processes. And we were actually doing the work as well of producing the rum. So that's what we kind of always try to champion is all of these various different cultures, traditional processes and methods, our suppliers use, and to be able to produce these wonderful products, these wonderful rums that, we're very privileged to sell.
So you mean you don't tell your clients that you specialize in dark rums?
Cask aged premium rums.
Cask aged premium rums. Speaking of cask aged and premium rums, I imagine that at any given time you have certain casks that are exceptionally rare, perhaps exceptionally old in some cases. And I imagine you have clients that you've done business with over the years that you might have in mind for certain casks, or maybe clients that have even, I don't know if you operate in a sense that sometimes clients have an idea of something that is going to be available for sale but isn't yet. And so I was just wondering, if I were to ask you what the most coveted cask that Main Rum has ever had has been, are there any that come to mind right away?
There was a Jamaican blended rum, which was 1972. That was pretty coveted. And currently we've got a Gardel 1984, which is a closed distillery from Guadeloupe.
Oh, wow.
It's might actually be the last cask in the world. Also, there's a Pierre Labatt 98, which is matured in a French oak cask, which you would probably think is too tannic, but the cask itself was very lightly toasted. And the liquid was, fairly powerful and bolshy, so it's actually really taken on the extractives very, very well. Let's see, what else could we do? What else?
I love how quickly you were able to rattle off those three to begin with, by the way. It's like the mental inventory you must have.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's thinking of, rum's gone as well. I think there was actually Gardel 1983, which was sold a few years ago. That was very, very expensive cask.
That Jamaica that you mentioned, the 1972, you said it was a blend. Was this like a multi-distillery blend?
Yes, I think it was 2 distilleries from Jamaica. I'd have to find out the original story for it. It's funny because some of the Infinity casks that we recently, they had some of this blending. And Gardel, they had some of the 2 Gardels, the 84 and the 83 as well. But there was much more of these types of things. Some of the 1998 HLCF, I mean, they were just really wonderful products. These particular rums, when they were bought and they've been in inventory for a really long time, these were rums that were used as flavor components for blends or the fragrance or confectionery industry. And nobody ever thought that these rums would be single cask aged rum like you see with Hamden now. Nobody ever sort of foreseen that as being a rum that people would drink because it was always used as a flavor component.
Yeah.
But once you get these high ester and high aldehyde rums with all of these large fruity flavors, they can stand up to an awful lot of cask maturation, particularly in on the continent here in the UK. And it keeps a lot of the original distillery character as well because of the flavors being so pungent. But, after 10, 15 years, these things round off extremely well. They take on the extractives, giving a lot more complexity, depth of flavor, complexity in your mouthfeel, but still keeping all of that really nice, rich, fruity esteriness coming through on the palate.
You mentioned quickly, I just wanted to cover, you mentioned Infinity casks. That was something that I think those originally came up in one of our interviews with Karsten, and maybe Karsten and Niels. I can't remember if it was them together or separate. I know you sold some of those. Have they all been sold?
No, we've still got some.
Wait, can you quickly just do a quick review if someone hasn't listened to the past interviews of what you what you define as an infinity cask?
Okay, so I mean, people would probably identify with the infinity bottle aspect of what I'm talking about. So
right, exactly.
The odds and ends of all your old rum bottles, and then you will put it into one bottle. It's slightly different in terms of the infinity cask. So what we actually do is a lot of samples which we had, which were retained samples, they'd been returned to the bonded warehouse because they were all under bond. We keep the samples basically for quality reasons. So if we've got any questions in the future about a cask that we may have sold, every single cask that we sell, we take a retained sample in case we need to take back for analysis at any given.
Wow.
So we usually keep them for around 12 to 18 months. But what happened was we had a lot of these samples and they kept being palletized and then taken to the bonded warehouse. But they'd stayed in bottle for quite a bit of time. And so once we had enough sort of pallets and bottles together, what we would do is we'd get all the samples, record each sample, and that goes into a barrel. So we'd decant all of these, hundreds of bottles back into a barrel. And basically that's what we would classify as an infinity cask.
So when you say bottle, this is like a large bottle. It's like people at home may be thinking of like these little sample bottles that Rum Geeks
it's
trade.
It's like a 500 ml bottle. So that's what we retain because we need to send it for analysis. We need to have a certain amount of liquid to be able to analyze it correctly.
You gotta have enough to make daiquiris with just so you know.
Well, you might be interested to know that I actually made another infinity cask quite recently.
Really?
Ooh.
But it's in a XBL cask, which is
cool.
Ex Madeira cask as well. So, and it's got a multitude of different varieties of rums in there, but it's fairly Jamaican on flavor profile.
What's maybe the most interesting or surprising rum that made it in there in your view?
Let's see, what would the well there was a sample of the Guadeloupe 1984 that went in there, so that's so that's quite significant.
Oh, nice.
There was some really old, what was it, KFM VSG, so it's coloured VSG, which is single wooden pot size, still from Guyana, and that was 91. So, I mean, that was a really, really nice rum.
It must be a big decision trying to figure out what kind of cask to use for the next infinity cask. Right.
Well,
and difficult.
Yeah. It's, whatever's to hand as well, which is easy to get. But it just so happened that we sold a BL cask and we wanted to keep the cask. So we decanted into IBC and supplied that to the client, which they were really happy with. And we kept the cask. So then it got earmarked to use the next infinity cask.
Nice. I had a question about that actually later. I think before we get to that stuff, we wanted to dig a little bit more into the rum itself and how you're matching that with the barrels as it comes in. But I think maybe a good place to start is to ask a little bit. My understanding is you're going to get bulk rum shipments that then you all need to decide what that's going to age in. But you also do have some casks that are shipped straight from the distilleries also. Is that correct? And if so, like, what's the rough split of that? How much are those straight from the distillery are you getting versus what you all have bulk rum coming in?
I think it's maybe 70-30, something like that. 30% cask, maybe. I think it really changes year on year, depending on where we buy from at different points in the year. So it can be very different, but I'd say roughly it's about that kind of split.
So, you've alluded to the process of matching a rum to a cask. I know, speaking to John's question just then, sometimes you're getting in kind of bulk liquid that you then take and choose a cask for. Sometimes you're getting in casks that you recask, or maybe you keep it in the cask for a while and then you recask it eventually. But what is your process for matching the rum to the cask? Like what do you look at? How do you analyze it? And some of it has to do with the casks you have on hand. Like what are you doing kind of step by step to find the perfect match?
Well, I think we always try to be intuitive to the market. So we look to what other people do as well. Even some of my clients have sent me samples of previous maturation processes that they've done with particular cask types or pre-season. which really helps us in our development. And so we kind of really we share those types of informations with people, and we work together to understand how different profiles might work in different rums. I mean, sometimes it's just a case of understanding what the original liquid is in the pre-season cask, understanding the flavor, and then getting your new rum, understanding what the total volatile content of that might be, and how the flavor works, how powerful the rum is, as to what kind of cask you might be able to use. Can it stand up to new flavors? Sometimes it's not as easy as it might look, and sometimes you just have to dive in and take a chance with some things. But speaking from experience, not had any issues yet, which is quite a gleeful place to be in, because it's not always that easy. But when we sort of get new rums in, we might use a multitude of different cask types, but we always have a standardized maturation period for once used bourbons. So we know that the once used bourbons work, and we know how they work in great detail. And with most rums and most origins that we have, again, with building up the profiles over so many years, with the same suppliers that we buy from, the same rums, the same marks, you can get a really good understanding of how maturation cycles work, and actually how the liquid develops over those periods of maturation cycles. And so the rums will change, every sort of 5-10 years, and they'll go into like a different flavor profile. So it's just about understanding that and seeing how you can actually work with it. And for the UK, we do a lot of the maturation processes in Europe and the UK. And so things happen a lot slower than what you would find in maybe an origin. It can be made a bit easier for us in terms of tracking the maturation curves, because we've got a lot of time to play with, and we can understand how it works properly. Also, some of the suppliers themselves, do a lot of these different types of maturations, using cognacs, armagnacs, and all of these different brandies and whatnot, and whiskies as well. And so sometimes we can get a glimpse into what they've done, and it can be a bit more of an accelerated process because they've aged at origin, and so we can understand how that might work over here as well.
Are there certain rums that are less predictable than others as they age, or is it all kind of fairly consistent from rum to rum?
I think that they are all different. What is different is the initial liquids that you buy. So the initial liquids are all very different in how they're produced, the flavor profiles that they can achieve. But your maturation should be fairly steady, and particularly in the UK, it generally is fairly steady. But it can develop and change over time as the extractives work. As we branch out into different cask types and pre-seasoned liquids, and these kind of things will, splinter off and change. And so it's just about monitoring it and understanding how far we can go with these types of things before we maybe need to take corrective action in the fact of taking it out of those particular casks and then recasking it back into its standardized maturation vessel, which would be, a once used bourbon. That's a pretty profile which everybody recognizes and everybody knows. And a lot of it is what, the rum industry is built on already. So in terms of people buying bottles, they understand that maturation process because it's generally what people do.
So the next step, I assume, once you've made all the hard decisions, now you've matched a rum with what you want to age it in, and now you have the harder part, which is just to wait. I want to know how long before you dive back into that and taste the rum again. You mentioned kind of maybe there's some standards with ex-bourbon, so that makes sense, but I imagine there's some variation with others. Is there a standard that you do? Do you say, no, we must wait this amount of time before we dive in? Or is it just kind of, I guess some is science and some is art, and I wanted you to speak a little bit to how that all works together.
I think it's very dependent on the process that you're trying to follow in terms of the liquid that you've got that is used and where you're actually maturing it. So just to give a small example would be that we'd used some ex-Islay whiskey casks. Mm-hmm. These were, quite a bit smaller than your standard 200 litre, so they were only 125 litre casks. Mm. So obviously your surface area is going to do a lot.
Right.
It was a lot quickly. The rum itself was quite a powerful rum, so and it had a base of maturation for about 10 years previously. So it had already taken on extractives and concentrated somewhat itself already. And so we wanted to recask it into a multitude of different cask types, which we did. And I think it was actually 6 different cask types. But very specifically, we used these ex-Hyler whiskey casks, which were peated whiskey casks. And that was the main kind of draw behind that, was to try and understand how that particular flavor works with these particular rums. But I knew that the casks were a lot smaller. And obviously the peaty flavor is quite bold. And
Yep.
It's, it was like every week after it had been filled, we'd be down there checking it and look at it.
Yeah, to babysit that one. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just about gauging how that works. But again, for that particular rum, we've got a lot of, used bourbon casks as well. And so if we need to change course of direction with this particular rum, then, we take all of these smaller casks. Say, for instance, it had too much of that peaty note to it, and it became unpleasant for whatever reason, which it's not. I think it's really nice, but obviously I'm going to be biased. But no, if we do feel like it's gone too far, then, we've got a lot of casks there that we would blend back together and then refill back into one choose bourbon cask, and then correct the maturation cycle and take it more down the course of the one choose bourbon flavor profile. But again, once you've got these extractives in there, they're in there. So, they will work and they will change the structures and the flavor profiles as we go through time.
On the note of ex-bourbon casks kind of being that like standard, profile that you use, and obviously that's kind of probably the most common cask type used by distilleries in their aging programs. Are all ex-bourbon casks relatively similar, or do you value ones from certain distilleries over others?
I think it always comes down to quality. So how the casks are made, I mean, it really goes a lot further back to, how the trees are cut, how the wood's aged and matured before it even gets to, the milling station. But you will not get that information.
Right.
One of those types of things. But, whether it's kiln dried or it's left outside and sort of matured properly. Yeah. Different bourbons have different mash bills, so they can create a variance in your own flavor profile. So that's always something to think about. But we generally use a multitude of different bourbon distilleries. And that could be within we could have a 50 cask rotation of one rum. And that's maybe got, 4 different bourbon barrels in there. So there could be some Beam, Four Roses, Heaven Hill, Jack Daniels, Buffalo Trace, and sometimes that can help because it can give you that little bit of variance in flavor profile and make your casks all very, very much the same rum, but they can be very slightly different in profile as well. And because of those very small nuances, there might be somebody who has a higher corn ratio in their mash. So it might produce a very slightly sweeter maturation profile than, say, I don't know, like a Four Roses or something,
As a higher rye, yeah.
Yeah, and then, we look at the American whiskies as well, like, we started maturing in some rye casks as well. And then there's some malted rye as well, which is a very slightly different aspect. So, but all of these things are quite exciting to understand and realize and help to create different nuances within the similar inventories that you have.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say, this might be a stupid question, and some of it is owing to my ignorance of the whiskey industry, but, you're right there in the UK. You have Ireland nearby. You have Scotland on the same piece of land. They make lots and lots of whiskey over there. I know you mentioned the peated whiskey casks, but you still find yourself using mostly ex-bourbon, it sounds like. I'm just curious why ex-bourbon became sort of the go-to, and some of it might just have to do with scale and everything rather than maybe ex-Irish whiskey or economics, but rather than something closer by.
Yeah, I think it probably is a mixture of economics and flavor profile. I think because it had been a very standardized practice for so many years, we're talking decades and decades. These sort of once used bourbon barrels being used across multiple industries. And so that's kind of almost created the
expectation.
Well, I think it's created like the standardized sort of flavor profile that you would find. So no matter what the rum is, like for instance, if you take like, I don't know, Barbados, Guyana and Jamaica, right, and Trinidad, they've been using once-used bourbon barrels, for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah.
Then we've been buying the barrels as they are and reusing it to the same casks, and then we sell it to people who then put it in bottles and people then drink it. So if you were to then just take all of that bourbon and just put it into, I don't know, malt whiskey, for instance, or blended scotch or whatever, really going to change your flavor profile very quickly.
Sure.
So it's not that we don't use malt casks. We do. We use English malt, Scottish malt. We're not onto the Irish yet, but I'm trying to get all four inclusive. But yeah, I think because that's already been a very standardized process for many, many decades, I think people are very used to that kind of flavor profile and that style of maturation, if you like.
Yeah.
And so, we try to deviate now somewhat by using different cask types, but I think we always have to lend ourselves to what people have understood for decades.
Now, going the opposite direction, when was the last time you received a barrel that wasn't something you'd ever aged rum in before? Has that happened at all?
Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, we actually got an ex-Madeira wine cask, and it was purely opportunistic at the time, but they were available and the casks were really good. And I went down and sniffed the cask and it's brilliant. I loved the flavor of the Madeiran wine, and it had been matured in a French oak cask, which is about 240 liters. Charred oak, then Madeira wine for about 3 years. And so we had the opportunity to use these, and we did, and we actually used some Mauritius rum in there, which actually matured extremely well in those casks.
That sounds like a good combo. I haven't had any Mauritius from Madeira cask, but that sounds great.
Yeah, it's a very particular profile because it's cane juice as well. It's very, very different. So you could maybe understand how it might work with molasses-based rums, but obviously the aromatics that you find in cane juice rums are really quite starkly different. So, but the flavors, obviously, all of those kind of floral, grassy, earthy, minerally kind of notes work very well with the sweet Madeiran wine that comes through. And yeah, we kind of expanded on that a lot more now. So because we've done that and matured for 5 or 6 years now, we understand how the Madeira wine works with particular distillates. And that's out into a lot of our other inventories now as well.
So, and then we kind of glossed over one piece of this where you said you actually went down to Madeira and sniffed the cask. So you're traveling a lot to go find and identify?
I didn't go to Madeira to sniff the cask, although I have Madeira.
Oh,
but no.
Okay.
No, it was in the yard at the time.
Okay.
So I opened the cask up and it still had a bit of the shipping liquid in. So generally they ship it with the liquid in, and then when it goes to filling, it all gets taken out and then it gets refilled with the rum. But yeah, it was just because it was there in the yard at the time.
Gotcha.
It was actually, there's just one other cask that's just come to mind now. But again, similar situation. They were just in somebody's yard, and I was up. It was in Scotland, and they just disgorged these casks, and it was some Scotch whiskey, Island whiskey that had been in there. But the casks themselves, they were actually only about 180 or 160 liters. They were quite squat and dumpy, but they were gorgeous looking barrels. And so I inquired about them, and they were Hungarian oak, and they were first filled, and then second fill peated whiskey. But when I opened the cask, I couldn't believe the flavor, the smells that were coming from it. And I was like, this is amazing.
You said they were first fill. I think the word got lost in the over Zoom when you said that what the first fill was. What was it?
Oh, sorry, it's stock ice. It was like Hungarian dessert wine, like second fill Scottish whiskey.
Peated whiskey, yeah. That's an interesting combo.
Anyway, it was very, 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 very lightly peated whiskey, but the smell of the cask was truly amazing. And so, I asked to buy them. And we got them in the end, and we filled it with a 15-year-old Spanish rum. And so that has been extremely well. So it's very nice.
Huh. Oh, those are, I guess you definitely shouldn't call those Scotland Yard casks though, because that would be confusing. Speaking of Scotland also, so I was reading a little bit into aging warehouses, and obviously you have yours there in Liverpool, and then there's also one in Scotland and then one back in Amsterdam, right? So how many barrels do you have aging in each location, and are there differences for each of those locations with aging that you notice, or they're roughly equal?
Well, obviously there's thousands of casks split equitably between the warehouse. Like how I dodged that question.
Very, very deft.
And we have started to do work in that effect in terms of, like, for instance, we've got a Brazilian rum which had been matured in Brazil for 5-6 years, and then we imported it in a few tanks, and then we refilled it into Montague's bourbon casks. So we've actually got some maturing in Liverpool, we've got some maturing in Scotland, and we've got some maturing in Amsterdam. And so part of our yearly sort of assessments would be to take these 3 rums and assess them against each other, and see if there is any different profiles,
Cool.
way through there. But again, we've got very, very similar rums in similar in different places that we would assess on that sort of basis as well, to see, are we producing very slightly different nuances in different warehouses by storing the same rums. So yeah, there's not a lot of data on it yet because it's fairly new, but yeah, there's something that we are working on to try and understand as well.
Are you traveling to those other locations fairly often, or is there like an Ian Hoyles in training at those locations that you talk to?
No, I mean, obviously there's lots of great staff over in Holland that are, able to do these types of things as well, and it does get branched out to everybody. But generally we would just do samples and then assessments. So for some of the warehouses, I used to go up a lot more, but because I'm not that operational anymore, I mean, I am still operational because I do a lot of the cask filling stuff, but in terms of logistics and moving things to different warehouses and stuff like that, it's somebody else's responsibility now, thankfully. It frees me up to do a lot more of the assessment work and, recent
podcast interviews.
Well, yeah, I mean, that has been a little bit more this year, these types of things. I was in Singapore and done a seminar there as well, and done some various presentations over the last sort of 18 months or so. So that's kind of, I think, where I'm probably going more to these days.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, you mentioned, how important education is as a platform for rum, and we couldn't agree more, obviously. So yeah, it's good to hear that you're doing that and getting more people to recognize the potential for rum out there, which we hope to do the same. I was looking over as we were prepping for this, an article that Matt Petrick had, and a few years ago he published, and he talked about whether Skier utilizes some of Main Rum's barrels in their rum blends, and the answer to that was a not too surprising yes. I'm interested to know how common the reverse is. How frequently are blends made at Skier sent over to the Main Rum to you for aging?
That does happen. So from time to time, there might be some remnant parcels of maybe older rums that have been laying, wooden vat for a period of time.
Yeah.
And so it's happened before, many, many years ago. And it does happen a little bit now. And so there's these kinds of little things left. And then we might sort of blend them together and then put them into cask. Well, a really good example would have been the JSAB. So that was actually a 1982 Sea Diamond H and a 1983 HGML. So it had actually been stored in Skier's vats for a very long time. And, about, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we took that parcel and then we put it into Smallwood. And that's one of the highest priced rums that we have at the moment.
When you say Smallwood, what does that equate to?
200-litre cask. So
okay,
yeah. So gone from large wood into small wood.
Gotcha.
Large wood is 3,000 litres or something.
Right, like a big vat, basically to a standard barrel size.
Yeah, I mean, if you go on Skier's website, you'll see all of the old barrels that they've got. They're very large barrels that they keep in the warehouse. That's essentially what it was stored in.
Gotcha.
Yeah. By the way, Remnant Parcels sounds like an excellent brand name for that. Just saying. Sounds like you could sell that.
I don't know about that one.
Parcels.
Remnant Parcels. I don't know.
It works. I would assume Ian, as you kind of alluded to, I think earlier in the interview, that you would say all the rums that leave your warehouse are very good to great. How do you know when you've got something there that is like truly special?
I think it's almost like one of those awakening moments when you try a rum and you just think, oh my God, this just tastes fantastic. And the thing is, I might think it tastes fantastic, or the whole team might think it tastes fantastic, but not everybody will.
Yeah.
The great thing about, rum and spirits and, people being individual in what they think and feel is that everybody's got their own opinion on what's good and what's bad, and, what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And it's all very subjective at times, but, we try to mature rums and release rums that are going to be what we feel is premium. And so given the years of experience that we have and the rest of the team has in doing these types of things, then we feel like we've got the right understanding to be able to say, yeah, we think this is okay. And have enough good traction.
I wanted to actually go back to something you also said previously about some of the remnant parcels that we talked about. So you mentioned kind of that there would be multiple casks that would come in. One of the things that we see in the whiskey industry, I think, are this concept of like small batch, and that there are multiple casks that kind of come together to perform the small batch, which has some various benefits to it, that, you have more product and it's more consistent and whatever, but it's not quite, a large release. Is that something that you all have thought about? I know, Main Rum is typically single casks, right? But is there that component there? Is there a demand for that? Has anybody ever engaged with you over something like that?
Yeah, we've had clients who will request things like that, for instance. So we might have somebody who is making a blend or has a reoccurring blend that they release every year. And so they would choose a batch of rum casks from the same rotation. So that could be maybe 4 or 5 casks. And they'll choose a multitude of different origins, different ages, so that they can create a blended rum that meets a specific profile that they're looking for. And so they will use small batches in that sense of maybe 5 casks of this, 3 casks of that, and 7 casks of the other, depending on what the blending ratios may be. But yeah, we have had people who've done that before. We've had people would want to make an aged rum blend from cask. And so they maybe choose 5 or 6 different casks from different origins, blend together to create a unique profile and a unique story. And then bottle it and sell it. So, yeah.
On the note of blending, because I know most of the time when Main Rum comes up, we talk about single casks naturally, but as we've covered over the course of this conversation, you do a fair amount of blending too. And one of the things that's, I don't know, I wonder about with blending, sometimes I taste a rum and I'm just like, there's nothing else out there that really tastes like this rum. Like, its profile is so distinct that like I can't tell someone to try something else because it's like this particular rum. Do you find that in blending? Like, I imagine in blending, I haven't done I've done little home blending exercises, but I'm certainly not an expert in it at all. But I would imagine that there are some profiles for blending that are somewhat replicatable. Like you might be able to use a range of rums to achieve this like certain job within the blend. And then, but to me, there's also some rums where it's like, if I need a rum to do this job in the blend, there's literally only one rum in the world that produces this kind of effect. Do you agree with that? Do you find that there are some rums that are just like you can't replicate it in a blend? And if so, like, which ones to you are the most distinct?
I think if you were looking for like a really high ester Jamaican rum, I think there's many other people that could produce something of that particular flavor that would be very similar. I mean, I've tried a lot of different high esters from different countries. Mm-hmm. It's nowhere near the same as Jamaican high ester. I would say that's probably one rum I would say is fairly sort of unique if you wanted to use that as a component into a blend. It's a very distinct signature. So, and it's very, very difficult to replicate, I would say. But, there's people producing rums all over the world. I mean, there's some very interesting things from Liberia, which were just extremely unique.
Really?
South Africa as well. I mean, there's some great distilleries in South Africa which have got really, really great sugarcane, great juice, wonderful sort of practices in distillation and maturation as well, which end up with a really fulfilling product. And another one was actually New Zealand, which just hadn't, but that kind of came out of the blue. And again, very unique, very interesting, very distinct signature on distillation. So yeah.
It's interesting. Like one of the first things that comes to mind for me is Port Morant. Like I always feel like it's so hard to find something. Every now and then I'll get a rum that I'll be like, there's a little bit of like a hint of Port Morant to me in this. But to me, that's one of those flavor profiles that's just like so unique. It's so hard to find something. It's interesting that you went to sort of some newer locations like Liberia, New Zealand, things like that. That's really exciting to hear.
Yeah, I think Port Morant is a very good one as well. I don't think you can find the powerfulness of Port Morant in other. The complexity is just unrivaled. I mean, Total Congeners is pretty high as well. I mean, that's part of the reason why I kind of really love Port Morant and these heavy rums, because I know they will stand up to a lot of maturation process and different cask types, but still retain a lot of its original character, which is essentially what you really want. You want people to know where the rums come from by tasting it. For those types of rums, they're great to work with.
You mentioned, Ian, earlier in the interview about overaging. Do you ever have a cask that you feel is just, it's a banger, it's ready, but hasn't had a buyer, and you're feeling like the clock is ticking on this thing? Do you ever feel pressure like that?
I'm hearing the clock ticking in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, because we're in the UK, it happened a lot slower. So as we start to identify these things, then we start to make the work in terms of if we do have something that we feel, in 12 or 18 months or 2 years' time is going to be getting over-oaked, or, too much of the extractives, too tannic, then we start making the work on it, day. And so we start offering out to our clients and then see, whether there's interest for it or not. I mean, I think in the end, if you got something like that, not that we've been very, very lucky, to be honest. We've been very lucky in that respect. I mean, I think with the amount of casks that we've used over the years, I've only ever seen 2 Sarah casks. So, it's a very good record to have, but I think it plays a lot into a lot of our supply chains, how we work with our suppliers, and how much trust is built up for cask suppliers and things like that, and that we don't sort of end up down that road of having sour casks. So it's quite fortunate. Over oaking, not really had that much of an issue. So again, we're very, very lucky, but then we put processes in place to ensure that we don't really go that far. So some of the older rums will be refilled into older casks, so there's no extractives. And another thing that we do always have to worry about as well is actually ABVs. So we've had it in the where ABV has maybe dropped a little bit too much, and then we would go to a blending exercise and use a fresh rum to enhance the ABV, which in some ways is very, very good. It produces very, very good rums because you use a lot of characterful aged rums in a fresh rum or a younger rum, which all of these wonderful cask characteristics really get spread out throughout that particular blend. And so it actually gives you a very nicely rounded rum in the end. You have to mature it for a bit more to get your age statement if you so desire. It does work very, very well. That so anything that sort of goes down too low in the ABV is still very, very useful to us, because it's got all of these wonderful characteristics through the aging process that we'll use to good effect.
What would be considered too low in ABV? Is that a matter of taste, or is it a matter of like this actually went below like 80 proof? What's kind of the?
I mean, obviously, you have to work within the definitions of rum is called. So 37.5% vol would be your absolute minimum, but 45 to 40, 40 to 45. I mean, that's probably getting a bit on the low side. I mean, this does happen for some of the older casks, and that you can appreciate that will happen. Some of the rums that we got many, many years ago would have been brought in at high strength, so the ABVs don't drop as much, so they can still be pretty high at the moment. They could still be in like mid 50s, if they were brought in and stored at 80% vol 20 or 30 years ago. But yeah, the ABV will drop more in the UK as well because of the wetter sort of atmosphere in which the casks are housed. So, and that will change. So from different places in the warehouse, you'll lose different rates of ABVs and things like that as well. That's pretty standard for most warehouses, I would say.
Yeah.
That ABVs is probably one of the most important, I would say.
We've talked a lot about a lot of different things that you are tracking, that you're processing, that you're doing with these thousands of casks that you have in multiple locations even. I imagine that you must have a pretty robust system for documenting and classifying and categorizing all of these. And I know that's probably pretty boring to talk about, but I'm just interested in some small insight into how does that actually happen for you?
Like I said, it comes from the evaluations per year. So,
sorry, I mean literally, like, how are you doing this? Like, is it
one
all
big
on a
spreadsheet?
Yeah. No, it is. A lot of it is spreadsheets. So I have we've got a criterion which we sort of collectively evaluate samples. We stick to that method, and then we record it. Look at previous notes or previous distillations, previous years to understand what's happening now as we look at the samples compared to previous. And sometimes we talk about how it might work in the future as well. And, we have targets in place for rums that we would like to reach sort of, 40 and 50 years old and things like that. So,
wow.
And that's, it's not an easy thing to do really, because, people may want to buy it and, all this kind of stuff. But, if you really want to age rums, and keep a lot of distillery character and get them to a really high age, then, these are the sort of things that we have to do. And it's like tipping scales for how many you can sell and how many you want to keep and how long you want to age them for. So it's complicated, but to be able to release, like a 50-year-old PM or something like that would be pretty cool.
How far have you pushed age?
Well, I mean, we have actually got some 50-year-old in stock. So,
wow.
Woo.
There's only 2 casks. It's very, very limited. But yeah, and I think some of the oldest that we've got is now 1972 would have been one of the oldest that we had. We've had much older in the past and sold, but I think the oldest that we've got now is 1982. I think that is pretty much the oldest that we've got apart from the 50-year-old. Yeah, which is 19s. No, it's not. It's 52 now. Yeah, I think it's 1974 or something like that. Sorry, I can't remember. But yeah, ideally, you'd want to get to a 50-year-old port run. I mean, and it's all very possible. It can all be done. It just needs to be done in the right way, using the right casks and processes.
Do you have a number in mind, just as like a personal challenge, just to see if you can do it? Like, I want to get to 70. Like, is there any element of that, or is it always just what's best for the rum?
If they get to 70, I'll probably be dead by then.
I was gonna say that's your retirement barrel.
It does make you think, and obviously, we do all these things now as a team, and eventually we will retire, and other people will come in and do these things, and so you're putting these things in place, you're putting things down in wood, and you're refilling and all these types of things. And, in the next sort of 20 years or so, somebody else is going to be coming in and managing the stocks and things like that. And so, it's always in the back of your mind that you need to make sure that you leave everything, or, that you can put things down now that's going to be there for somebody in the future. And for the prosperity of the company, E&H Gear and Main Rum Company as a whole, to carry on doing business as well, and so what we do now is important for what they do in 20 years.
And speaking of the future, and I know we're wrapping up pretty soon here, but speaking of the future, I want to ask a little bit like, oh, this is weird. This is so weird. We may have to cut it out, Will. But
what are you about to say?
So I was thinking about a recent trip I had to Arlington National Cemetery, which is here near Washington D.C. and it's very large. Yes. very large, like gravesite, like of World War II veterans, and it's very expansive with the amount that they have. And the reason it comes up in my head is because they are adopting these processes now where they can locate very easily a specific gravesite for visiting. And it kind of triggered in my mind the idea of you have these thousands of casks and you have to keep track of all of them and know where they are. And I'm sure you don't have like an RFID tag on every cask and like, GIS live mapping or anything. Okay. But is there any efforts to like think about that and how you might be evolving your processes for the future?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So obviously companies been doing it for many, many years. And so obviously we've got a lot of experience with that. But yes, technology will have a part to play. I'm sure, we see a lot of companies doing it at the moment. I think if we are to do it, I think it's a very detailed process. We need to understand really what information do we want? What do we want to gather? How do we want to understand, or what do we need to understand about the stock that we mature? What's the overall sort of goals for putting these kinds of technologies and processes in place? And for which I'm sure there is very great valuable data to be taken from these types of things. I've looked at many different types of processes in terms of, temperatures, humidity, identifiers, and how the spaces work over the course of a 12-month period, and how that affects the liquids in terms of, the moistures and oxidization in casks and, all these different things, the loss of volume, evaporational losses and things like that. So, yeah, I think it's definitely there to be used. There's a lot of work to be done to implement those types of things. I would say there's probably a lot of analysis as well. And so, I think it'd be very costly, but very useful.
Well, Ian, as you know, the if it ain't broke, don't fix it part of this podcast is how we end every interview, which is with the rapid fire section. And I was just thinking, this is really an opportunity for you to step up and show the Amsterdam office that you can do this just as good, if not better, as they can. So anyway, I know you're a little bit prepared for what's coming next, having coworkers who have been through the process. But John, do you want to introduce the segment for Ian?
Sure. So this is the infamous at this point rapid fire section where we're going to give you a ton of quick answer questions, this or that type options, or just short answer as best you can. There's no wrong answers, but there are more right than other right answers sometimes. But as Will was saying, we know that you have a lot to rep for EA Shear and Main Rum, so that you're going to bring it strong. So I'm ready when you are.
Okay, let's go.
All right, I've got 60 seconds on the clock and go.
Okay, neat or on the rocks?
Neat.
Column, pot, or blend?
Pot.
Okay, aged or unaged? Well, duh, with this one. Molasses or cane juice?
Molasses.
Okay. Ex-bourbon or ex-sherry as a secondary maturation? Sorry, I should have said ex-bourbon or ex-sherry as a maturation.
Ex-bourbon.
Okay, and now if we had to go ex-bourbon or ex-port?
Oh, I do like a port finish.
Oh.
If it was an MMW 1990 in a port cask, yes.
Good answer.
All right. You mentioned there are categories large wood and small wood. Do you have extra large wood or tiny wood?
Australia has extra large wood.
That's true, yeah. Those big vats at Bean Lee.
We do actually have very, very tiny wood as well. Look at the little 3.5.
There it is, the very, very tiny little wood.
That is very tiny.
Excellent.
A little experiment in the office where we're trialing different seasoned liquid than those casks.
Excellent.
There you go. There is a purpose for teeny tiny wood.
Yep. And we'll have to ask Steve McGarry about extra large wood down there in Australia.
He's gone.
Who is your first call when you know you have something really special or interesting and you want to share?
Carsten or Marion, probably.
Okay. What's your current favorite rum distillery in the world?
Oh, no. Could I have two?
Yes.
We'll allow it.
I would go Hamden and Diamond, Guyana.
Classics.
Ooh, okay. You're speaking Will's language there for sure. If we were in the middle of the Main Rum Company warehouse and I yelled out, Ian, come check this out, which one of you would arrive first, you or Ian Smith?
Neat.
You're faster? You're just categorically going to get there. All right.
He didn't even tell you that.
He'd tell you that. What's your favorite movie of all time right now, Ian?
Complete curveball.
Yeah. Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, Volume 1, I assume.
1.
Excellent. Will doesn't know what we're talking about, but that's
you're
a great
speaking
movie.
John's MCU language right now.
Awesome. I'm already casting the characters of who in Guardians of the Galaxy you and the other people in EA Sheer are.
I'm small.
And finally, during international soccer tournaments like the Euros that's going on right now or the World Cup, do you support England, Scotland, or the Netherlands?
Definitely not the Netherlands. No, I supported them until we had to play them. Actually, I lived 20 years in Scotland and I was born in England, but I've lived 20 years in England now, so I supported Scotland as they went through. But of course, I have to support my home nation, which is England, of course. So.
All right, it's coming home.
Yeah,
we ran through time long ago. By the way, that was I had to let it keep running though. That was great.
All right, well, thank you, Ian. I appreciate your candor with those.
Probably was good fun.
Well, before we officially wrap up, anything coming down the pike for Main Rum Company that people can be excited about? Anything you can share about the future?
Well, I think maybe if you guys are going to visit in January, you might be able to see something for yourself. So, lots of things changing. It's a always developing sort of place, to be honest. Whether that's new rums coming through, new origins that we're purchasing from, or new marks being produced by different distillers, and then we're using different cask types for different rums as well. So there's always something new. There's always something different. I think that there's always going to be something every year that's going to be different. So it should be good. It should be fun. Yeah.
You can tell Ian is a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because he dropped the equivalent right now of an after credit scene on everybody with saying that there's more to come. There's more to come, people.
A nice teaser and a crossover because he mentioned that we're going to be there in January. So it's kind of like, I'm not an MCU expert, but I understand that sometimes they hint at the characters crossing over. So there's that planted in there too. Amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah, all this really shows is that I watch too many movies.
All right, Ian. Well, thanks so much for taking some time out of your Friday afternoon. John and I are just getting our days started over here, but it's great catching up with you. And looking forward to seeing you in person in a few months.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. And then thank you so much for your time today. I've had a lot of fun. So,
of course.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ian.
All right, take care, guys.
All right, thanks everyone for listening to another episode of the Rumcast. Thanks to Ian Hoyles for stopping by, chatting with us, taking us inside Main Rum from a completely different angle. And we'll throw a link to Main Rum's website in the show notes if you want to learn a little bit more about them. They've got all kinds of stuff on the website. I think they have a single cask tool. So if you're interested in buying a cask, you can go there and check it out. This isn't sponsored by Main Rum. I just think it's cool, so I'm mentioning it. And as always, if you want more Rumcast, we are on Patreon. We are doing bonus episodes. We're doing happy hours. So you can support the show. You can get more content. Go to patreon.com/therumcast. That's patreon.com/therumcast. We've got a Discord. You can get in there. You can chat with the community with us. It's a grand old time right here on the World Wide Web. Or if you would like to just let us know what you thought of the episode, let us know if you have ideas for other episodes, people you think we should talk to, topics that we should tackle. You can send us an email at host@rumcast.com. That's HOST@rumcast.com. Or you can find us on social media. John, where can they find us?
You can find us at the Rumcast. We are now on Threads, as well as Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So you can find us there. Twitter's phasing out. We're phasing Twitter out. I don't know. I keep saying that. I've trolled that for the last 6 episodes, just because I'm scared. I haven't had one person yet say, "No, John, don't stop doing Twitter." So I'm guessing
this is your time. If you are begging us to stay on Twitter, make your voice heard now. We've also been putting some stuff on YouTube as well. The semi-blind review episodes, we're putting video of those on YouTube. So if you want to see our faces as we try these rums, having no idea what they are, check that out. We're the Rumcast on YouTube. I think we're pretty easy to find. But I think that just about does it, John. So
yeah. Oh my God, Will. But I had one other thought. Can you were saying Ian Holmes right now. I just realized why they have so many Ians. Oh, I said Holmes? Oh, my God. I think that's the actor from The Hobbit. I was thinking Ian because it's E&A Shear.
Oh.
So E&A Skier, they are hiring Ians like crazy because it goes right with their name. There you go. Mystery solved.
They put the E&A in E&A Shear, yeah.
It almost works.
All right, it almost works. Not quite. That should be the motto of the show, I feel like.
For the very end of the show, it almost works, but not quite.
Exactly. You know, it goes off the rails eventually, and if you listen to the end, you hear us stumbling all over the place, trying to find our way to a happy close, which I think we found our way there now, John. So I will see you soon again, and until then, cheers.
Cheers.